The Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Cindi Howson. Cindi is the Chief Data Strategy Officer at Thoughtspot. Cindi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, JP. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and we're delighted to have you. So Cindi, as we do with all of our episodes, could we please start with yourself? And could you give us a bit of an overview of your journey in technology from where you got started, some of the roles you've held along the way, and take us up to today as the Chief Data Strategy Officer at Thoughtspot?
Yeah, so this is a career that goes back 30 years, originally working for Dow Chemical in Switzerland and doing all things tech related, implementing local area networks, building computers, and then really worked on the world's first global data warehousing project, implementing BI tools globally, figuring out how to actually pull data from operational systems like SAP. Later, I worked for Deloitte and Touche and then started my own business, the BI Scorecard. Have written 5 books in the data and analytics space. Was the lead author for the Gartner Analytics and BI Magic Quadrant, as well as the IT score maturity models, and pioneered the work related to data for good, where I think a lot of things related to AI ethics comes into play while I was at Gartner. And then for the last 3.5 years, have been the Chief Data Strategy Officer at Thoughtspot and host of the Data Chief podcast.
Thank you so much. So a long-term component of data and data for good. There's so much we could talk about just from your overview, but let's start with Thoughtspot. For people listening who are not familiar with Thoughtspot, tell us who you are as a business, what the mission of the organization is.
So our mission is to enable a fact-driven world. We believe that a fact-driven world is a better world and a more equitable world. And to enable that, we need to put data and analytics infused with AI in the hands of everyone. So right now, data is often locked up in the hands of data experts and professionals. And even as we think about AI, it's often a black box, what's going on behind the scenes. So we really want to enable this for everyone. We do this with a consumer grade ease of use, world-class design that leverages search and AI to generate insights in the modern cloud. So no data movement outside of your favorite database, whether it's Snowflake, Google BigQuery, Databricks, and all based on open APIs. So if you want to embed these AI generated insights in a consumer facing app, we have companies doing that around the world.
Thank you. And you mentioned companies all over the world. You're working with some of the biggest and most well-named brands across all industries, whether it's Walmart, Hulu, NASDAQ, the list goes on and on. Can you talk to us then about your role as the Chief Data Strategy Officer, what that entails and how you work in conjunction with the various other data and AI teams across the organization?
Yeah. So JP, there's 3 parts to the role, or maybe I'll say there's 4. So it's being a thought leader, like talking with you on this podcast today, which really, for me, it's about changing sets and behaviors so that people are willing to embrace data. We still have a lot of people that are afraid of data, afraid of gut feel, or they prefer gut feel decision making, and they're afraid of AI. So educating the world, being an evangelist in that regard. The second part is working with our top customers. And this to me has been my lifelong sweet spot because I'm able to bridge both technology and business to say, what are you trying to achieve and why? And so some of our customers that I have the privilege of working with, healthcare is a huge one. So working with the Mayo Clinic, for example, that they can execute on their data strategy. Or I have to give a shout out to our customer BD, Becton Dickinson, who just won an award, the Ventana Research Award, for their work that has been so pivotal in getting medical devices faster throughout the supply chain during this pandemic. And then even look at in my backyard, we have Verizon, great telco company. Onsar just won an award for being the analytics leader of the year. So just some of the best brands, large and small. That's working with customers. The third part is working with our product team, making sure that we're co-innovating with customers and really advising what are the bets we should be placing. The fourth one I was going to add is just as being part of a startup, it's building a company. And so having programs, I also champion some of our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so partner with organizations like the Mark Cuban Foundation AI boot camps, as well as women leaders in data and AI and women in data to really make our industry more inclusive and better.
Because you have such a focus on customers, I do want to spend a bit more time talking about this because looking at your website and the amazing ticker tape of all these brands, many of whom have huge investments in data and analytics and AI themselves, large teams full of talented people, but yet they still need Thoughtspot in certain areas for assistance. What is it that you're bringing to these organizations that they either struggle to develop themselves, and why are Thoughtspot able to create this opportunity to help organizations that many organizations cannot develop internally?
As an industry, we've done a pretty good job at collecting data and provisioning it maybe in a data warehouse, a central repository. But as an industry, we have not done a good job at enabling access to that data for the masses. And this is the unique problem that ThoughtSpot solves. There's estimates that anywhere from 40 to 90% of data is not accessible. What is the point of storing that? We may not even be using this for machine learning, but for sure, we're not using it for everyday decision making. And to me, I just think of that as one big data landfill. 7 years before ThoughtSpot was even founded, I was writing about the idea of using search and natural language processing as a way of democratizing data. And this is really what ThoughtSpot is, the first tech company that has been able to do that and do that at scale. So this is our number one competitive differentiator, but I think you have to wrap it inside the modern cloud ecosystem and a consumer grade ease of use that is others really have not been able to imitate, whether it's a company and customer or another tech company.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
So you mentioned that when you were talking about the four aspects to your role, and one of which was building a startup, and ThoughtSpot has been incredibly successful in doing so since it launched back in 2012, and particularly in recent years where you guys have grown despite market challenges and continue to attract talent. Can you talk to us about the work, the culture, and the environment for people at ThoughtSpot, particularly speaking to an audience of data professionals? Give us a look behind the scenes and what would it be like if we were a member of the data team at ThoughtSpot?
Yeah, so our culture is built on the tenet of selfless excellence. And this is something that our co-founders, Ajit Singh and Amit Prakash, were very intentional about establishing early on. And selfless excellence means that you put the team first. There's no ego and no politics. And I look at the way it's not only the data team internally, it's any team that's building a product or any team working with a customer. It's collaborative and it's all hands on deck. We will even say we don't care whose tech is in the mix. If it's not our fault, we're still going to own it and deliver for the customer. And I look at in the internal data team, what I love is we are so innovative. I think about whether it's our people analytics, our product analytics, or even our marketing analytics, the number of applications we use. And we talk publicly about what we use to better understand our customers, whether it's people AI, Matillion, Snowflake, Hex. Of course, we use Thoughtspot as well, and just really innovative, and anyone can bring an idea forward.
Cindy, you've invested a lot of time for yourself in becoming a thought leader and an expert in the data space as a whole. You mentioned in your introduction, being authoring several books. So you've really got a sense of what's happened and what's led us to where we are today, which gives you a lot of information and ammunition to speculate on what we can see down the road. When you look at the roadmap for the industry, but specifically focusing on ThoughtSpot over the next few years, what are some of the things that you're particularly excited about to see change in our industry and for you and your team to work on?
I think the speed at which we can do things and the scale is unprecedented. If I go back in time, and even there are some slower moving companies that are still doing this, you couldn't get to all the data because we were living in an on premises world and you maxed out on performance or data volumes. You had to adopt these strange behaviors, creating cubes and aggregate tables. You had to rely on experts, kind of a whisper down the line anytime you had a business question. And I think about the way that cloud and open APIs enable greater collaboration and the ability to leverage best of breed capabilities across a full analytic and AI workflow that has never before been possible. So, as I think about some of our customers being able to say, so let's take Disney streaming, for example, of which Hulu is just one brand, being able to very specifically say which shows are the most popular down to the individual viewer and knowing the content type that is really resonating, as well as setting at the right price and performance. What plans do you want to be on? And we never could, as an industry, get to this level of granularity before. And then I also have to say the AI generated insights. So, one of our other customers, St. Jude's Children's Hospital, they were able to share using AI generated insights their understanding of where the biggest donors are physically located. And it's 5 miles from a Whole Foods store. And there's other things that they're not allowed, they don't talk about publicly. And I think about the impact of that. We really just can better service, whether it's donors or patients or customers, navigating this supply chain. All of these things just were not possible before.
Final question from me, Cindy, and usually I end the podcast talking about the hiring expected at Hotspot in the years to come, but I want to actually take a different approach with yourself. You founded the Data Chief podcast, and as somebody who's been successful in a chief data strategy role, you've got a lot of knowledge to share. Can you talk to us about what your mission was in launching the Chief Data podcast and talk to us about how you're using it to give information to aspiring data officers who are learning the role? Because it's obviously one that's relatively new in the workforce. It's difficult for organizations to define what it is and also for people to understand what's required. Tell us about the Data Chief podcast, what your mission was in creating it and what you've learned from doing it.
Yeah, so it's a funny story, JP, because I'm more of a writer than a podcaster. And so I have to go back to fall of 2019. when I was still in my first year at Thoughtspot, and our chief marketing officer, Scott Holden, no, everyone's podcasting. Nobody reads books anymore, but some of us do. We should really try and do a podcast. And so we recorded the first episode of the Data Chief podcast in December 2019, and then continued recording, released it actually April 24th, 2020. Now think about that. We were 1 month into the pandemic lockdown, and what a blessing it turned out to be, because it allowed us to connect with people from around the world. And our vision, it's not just for chief data officers. I would say it's anyone that is leading a data team. So sometimes that's the VP of analytics and supply chain, but it's also people working on those data teams and aspiring maybe to move up the ranks. But we wanted to, one, create a tribe of change agents and really address the broad spectrum of what it takes to create a data-driven organization. And part of that is technology, so we will dive into that. But part of it is culture, people change management. Some of it's power and politics, making the case for these things with the board or the CEO. And so it's really giving people that sense of community with thought leadership.
Amazing. Cindi, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story with us. It really was a pleasure to hear from you and learn about your journey and what's got you to where you are today. Great insight into the work, the mission, and the impact that ThoughtSpot is having. Data for Good resonates with us here at Alldus because we've created our own podcast to get the message out there of AI for good. And the Chief Data podcast sounds like something that we should all be listening to. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on today. And we wish you, the team, and everyone at ThoughtSpot the best of luck in the months and years to come.
Likewise. Thank you, JP.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.